Hello and welcome to another episode, not the Perf Roundtable, but a Perf discussion between Steve and I. How are you today, sir?
I'm good, sir. How are you?
I'm good. So today we're going to talk about training momentum. So when we set up a block for people, you've seen how when you plan for someone, they can run the same thing and they generate momentum over time. And that same block that you just keep rerunning over and over again just uh, appreciates and gets better over time. Whereas some people need a bit more of a runway, and you got to like lead them into this sweet spot, and then
Yeah,
they can start to pop off, right? So
yeah.
how have you seen how do you describe like these two types of people or these two types
I
of
guess
presentations?
so we have like people that it's just like kind of linear, right? It's just like +5 each week, +10 each week, +7.5 each week, or something like that. And then just keep going until they hit the end of the block. And they kind of know where they're going to end up. They work backwards because they kind of got like an ideal block length. They know how long they're going to be going for, whether that be 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 3 weeks, something like that. They'll know where they're going to end up. So they work backwards and then figure out where they're going to start from. But then we've got other people, right, who are like really slow burners. And it's almost like they can't start, if they start too heavy in the block, even if they try and work backwards, because they know that like it's kind of like a 7.5 kilo jump the whole way through. It's like they were talking 4 weeks, so they want to end up 30 kilos higher than where they end up. It just won't happen because they're starting too heavy. Whereas they have this like that momentum that we speak of, and it's like huge speed burst like 3 weeks in. If they start lighter in the block, almost lighter than or at the same point as where they will just start any block, and eventually over time that gets a little bit heavier because they get stronger inevitably, but the percentage range of their 1RM is kind of the same all the time. It's not like, okay, I'm going to finish this block at like 260, so I'm going to start at 230 or something like that. It's like they got to start at like 200, and then they'll go like 200, 210, 220, 245, 260 or something like that. Like there's just this big jump in the middle where they just get this huge spike. Whereas the other people we get, it's just like linear the whole way. It's like 10 kilo jumps the whole way. It's very individual, and it takes time to acknowledge. But I think some people do have it, some don't have it, and it's kind of trial and error of where you start the block, and also how light you start, how hard you start, and where you kind of want to end up. But also like that feeling in that day. I know you've had it before,
Mm-hmm.
that you get that big speed boost in week 3.
Yeah, so like in the past where if we were running that assumption where like I have this huge spike, the 2 weeks before that generally have been pretty stagnant. It'd be like week one would be something pretty light. The next week would be like 2.5 or 5 kilos, and then we'd see this like huge 15 kilo spike, all at the same
Yeah,
RPE. Like for some reason, it just happened that way. Um, but I feel like as of late, my response has changed a lot. Like my low jumps are much more consistent now, where I'm just able to consistently add like plus 10 to 15 kilos per week across all my lifts except for bench. I think a lot of that has to do with like being able to recover from training, right?
yeah,
Because now that I have moved up a weight class and I'm able to manage more training, like there's more stimulus present, and therefore I'll be able to both recover from it and adapt, right?
yeah. So I think it does come from recoverability, right? So when you're trapping yourself, well, not trapping, when you're in a weight class, your body only has so much recoverability sources to pull from, and it's so used to pulling from the same ones all the time. You give it something else like the surplus that you're now in, just creates more predictability, I suppose, around your just like general life and well-being, and you're able to just be more predictable, as I said, in training with those linear progressions through the weeks to weeks. Whereas like before, you had the same recoverability sources each week, like week in, week out. It was nothing could really change because you're sitting at maintenance calories or in a deficit, never really in a surplus. So everything was the same. It's like these first 2 weeks is your body just recovering from the block before, and then you get back to normal, and then you get like one good week, and
Yeah.
then it's like, okay, now we're going to start again.
Yeah. I felt that a lot. I want to dial it back then. So say we've got these two archetypes right now where like you gotta it's a consistent jump over time and you end up somewhere big, or you kind of need to keep it with a slow burn, right? So what kind of traits do you feel like would help you identify those types of people? Because like you can't look at someone and say, oh, you're a slow burner, or like you make
Yeah.
consistent jumps. It's more so the things outside of like physical presentation, right? It's like recoverability aspect. Do you consider weight classes at all?
Not really weight classes. Potentially, yeah. Like I can see more of it happening with like the heavier people get, because there is such sheer load on the bar, so they can't really move that much week to week each time. But like you said, like you can't look. It's not like leverages. You can't just look at someone and be like, yeah, you're gonna pop off in week 3. Like that's your go off week. It's
Yeah.
just not gonna happen, right? So you can't look at someone. It has to be, I guess, dealt with over time by just communicating, right? And that's just someone being like, hey, like this week, like last week, I squatted 220 and I just hit 230, and it was easier than last week. Do I go up, or like depends how valuable you are as a coach, but it's also like them asking, do I go up? And it's like you ask, just acknowledging, hey, let's just leave it this week and let's see if this is a trend that plays out for more than one block, because it could just be like an anomaly just happening there. But if we find that this happens consistently block to block, like this week is just extremely strong, then we know like, okay, let's keep the chains on for the first 2 weeks, let your body recover, because essentially that's what it's doing, right? From the block before, we're recovering, and then we're like pulling back. If we think about like, having a bow and arrow, we're pulling that arrow back to release it, but we release it in that week 3, and then week 4 is usually, as I've seen from like yourself, you can add a bit more, but it's quite close as well.
Yeah, like that's when well, me personally is when I would start to see symptoms of fatigue start to show up, right?
Yeah.
So like you could still add load, however, it's not going to be as doesn't feel as fresh feeling as that week 3,
Yeah.
right? So
100%.
I guess like that would be referencing time to peak. And if you can time it correctly for each individual athlete, then if you were to like cash in on that specific week, you're at this crossroads where like fatigue is low enough where you can just keep piling on kilos in that given session. And you're also like strong enough to be able to like just keep going. Right. Whereas say if you
Yeah.
leave it a week too long, you could still push and you're strong enough, but like there's fatigue present. Is that
Yeah.
kind of how you see things? So
Kinda. It's makes it harder.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Like I've found, although we could absolutely add load in like the later weeks of training, momentum will start to die down. Like it feels very early on, especially if like load progressions are like made correctly and we're not starting too heavy or too light where it's like we need to cover too much ground. Like those early weeks, it feels like the load is coming to you. Whereas
Yeah.
when you get towards the end of the block and like fatigue starts to settle in and like you're moody, not sleeping properly, you kind of need to go into that zone where like, you just got to be gritty. And if you've set a goal for yourself that you need to go hit, like you need to hit it despite these fatigue symptoms.
Yeah, for sure. And then I guess if we're looking at competitions, like we want to generate a bit more fatigue through a peak, right? So well, I guess we use you as an example going into Perf Cup. We skipped that week 3. We didn't really lean into it too hard, even though we knew that was when you were going to like pop off. But in my mind, as like the person programming, I had that laid out. So I was like, we're going to push like an extra week or two. And the only reason why I was going to do that is because that week 3 was going to give me a good indication of what you are capable of after kind of tapering back, super compensating, and then being on the platform. Because the week 3 is almost where because if we're talking about like, programming a normal mesocycle or a normal block, we're not dropping a bunch of volume, right? We're not dropping everything out. Intensity may come down, but volume stays relatively the same in terms of how much you're actually doing. Whereas if we look at a taper, it's a bit more aggressive. So I knew that you would kind of end up in that week 3 position on the platform just from washing out the fatigue, because essentially that's what was happening for 2 weeks of your block, right? Is you just like you recover, and then in that 3rd week is when you feel good. Basically, almost like super compensated if I put it into words.
Yeah, got you. So in that case, then, from like, would you say for everyone, you kind of think about trying to accumulate as much fatigue as you can going into a competition? Because some people might not respond well with that sensation of like, oh, I just feel like really, really tired, right? So do you have methods where you've got someone where you can lead them into a comp and that top end strength is kind of there. Say, for example, like for me, that's my week 3. Would you kind of lead someone into that with like less dependency on like a taper or something like that?
Yeah, you definitely can, but you got to. I think that's when you need to lead the week out a bit differently. So it can't be like you can't come into each session feeling fully recovered. That's kind of where we would lean into like an SBD session on the competition day,
Yeah. Do you
rather
mind
than like.
explaining that a bit more? So
So if
you're
we think
saying,
about
sorry, you go.
So if we think about like writing a program, right? We're writing someone's week out and we say squat Monday, deadlift Thursday, primary bench Saturday or something like that. They're coming into each of these sessions relatively recovered, right?
Yeah.
For each of those lifts.
Yeah.
So you get that really good effect in week 3 on the squat on the Monday, the deadlift on the Thursday, and then the squat and the bench on the Saturday. But if we leave bench out of it because predictability is different in terms of frequency and everything as well, and it's usually squat and deadlift where we'll see the highest spike in performance as well. We take them to the bench out of it, but we're looking at the squat and the deadlift. And if you get that huge spike on the Monday and the Thursday, it's harder to kind of lead someone into a competition to compete on a Saturday, right? If we're just trying to go with momentum the whole time. But if we can SBD them on that day, right, and we know that week 3 is always that week where they're just going to be extremely strong, that's when we won't need to change things leading up. That's when we'll just be like, okay, we also know that their deadlift's probably going to be stronger because we won't be doing back down sets of squats if we SBD them on a Saturday and they compete on a Saturday.
Yeah.
So we know that they're going to feel better there, and we know that their squat in that week is generally always stronger. May feel shittier in the like lead up of that week at the start of the week or something, but we know that we have enough data accumulated over like 3 or 4 blocks saying that week 3 is the week. That's when we'll try and lead that into the competition. But
Yeah.
it needs to be someone that's available to do essentially a 4 or 5 hour SBD session on a Saturday too, right?
Yeah, for sure. So like it sounds like if you aren't going to rely on as much of a taper, you need to make sure like you've got data backed behind you, or you're just making like a very bravado attempt to like program someone into competition with less of a taper.
Yeah,
Right?
because you think about if we're gonna have someone compete on a Saturday, right, and then but their main squat day is on a Monday, and then you're trying to lead them into the competition. We say we got 1 week out from the competition, they'll squat on the Monday. It's like, then do you squat them heavy again on the Monday of the week 3? Because that's when we know it's going to be strong.
Yeah, like it makes it
So
very difficult to predict if it's not set up in a
yeah,
way where like you don't have to change anything that final week.
yeah. If you can keep everything the same, then it's very very good and very a very good style of programming someone into a competition and just running with momentum the whole way. But if you don't set it up properly, it can be very unpredictable, and they're someone that's not going to know until they get there, which is very hard, especially the higher level competition we get to.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of like setting things up as well, we touched upon like momentum, and you have people that can repeat the same like layout, almost the exact same like rep scheme, and just improve on what they've done in the previous block. Whereas you have other people who can't respond that way, and like the shelf life of that block is pretty much like expired, and you need to like find something else for their training to continue to be effective. Right. So how do you balance these two? Because like sometimes you find something that works, and if you try it again, it doesn't work anymore. So in the context of like, let's say a competition prep where you're really far from training and you've found something that's worked, but you can't use it for long, how have you kind of played around with the programming aspect of that?
So I guess that's where you find someone's, I guess, like magic number, right? Their magic rep scheme, set scheme. Well, I won't say set scheme, more rep scheme that they just can perform well, and they still are strong, right? So you got to go away from that to be able to keep it there, keep it the strong. So let's sevens for me. Like I've said it enough times that like sevens on squat for me is like my money sort of rep range. It's just where I perform better. And I don't know why, but you give me eights and that last rep just turns into RPE 10. But you give me sevens and I'm completely fine the whole set. And I'm not sure whether that's just like my body not cooperating or it's just sevens just easier. I'm honestly not sure, but I just know I perform better because I can get the set done and I feel good after it and it stays the same speed. But it's like I had to go away from that. I had to go up to 8s, 9s, and 10s to be able to make sure that 7s stayed strong and didn't just like spin the wheels and burn out there. If I just spin the wheels and burn out there, then it's just becomes a waste of time almost because you're just doing the same repetitive thing the whole time. So it's like we go away, we do more reps, and we go through that the hard shit, the pushing through like mud, right? Where it is hard. Like I just said, like you give me one more rep and it turns into an RPE 10, that's 8s. You give me 9s and it's like now I've got to severely drop the load like a lot.
Yeah.
You give me 10s and it's even further. So it's like I'll do like 180 for sets of 10, but I can do like 220 for sets of 7 at the same RPE. But that's 40 kilos difference, right?
Yeah.
That's huge. Like on my back, it's a massive difference, but that's just the variance that I need to do those extra 3 reps. And I can't honestly tell you why my body responds that way, but it's just what happens. And I get through like those 10s, if it's 180 really, really fast, I can get through them good. But we know that like putting 220 kilos on my back and hitting it for 7 reps is going to provide more stimulus in terms of overall strength and just like better adaptations to a competition lift than hitting 180, right?
Yeah, I got you. So like when I think about that, right, like potentially when you do reps of 7, like you're efficient enough to be able to handle a pretty high relative intensity of like your percentage. But if you go like into 6s and you run sort of like RPE style training and you just like let off the leash to just push as much as you can, that intensity range can be too much where too much fatigue is generated. Is that?
Yep.
Yeah.
So we've tried that. I've tried coming down to because it's like, okay, I can, you've seen me, like I can grind through just about anything if I put it on my back, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm good. So we tried that. We tried bringing all 3 days down to 4s, 3s, and 5s.
Yep.
Across the whole week, and I just was just shit. It was just too heavy. So it's like 7s is the sweet spot of like sheer load and intensity and volume. Where
Yeah.
it's like
So
I
all
don't put
3.
too much on my back to generate too much fatigue or accumulate too much fatigue. Whereas you give me 4s and I'll try and do like 240 or 250 for 4, but that's just too much.
Yeah, got you.
And it's only 10, 20 more kilos, right? It's not that much, but when you do it, that's quarter ton. That's heavy fucking weight.
Yeah.
And it just fatigues me too much.
Yeah, because you're able to do lower reps, naturally you're just gonna want to do more weight as well.
Yeah. And I'm capable of doing it, but it just never worked. It would just my squat just went into the ground.
Yeah, got you. Think that'll tie into like I don't want to tangent off too far because like that could also relate to like designing another microcycle for you where it's like you can control intensity with lower rep ranges, but that's something else.
We
Right?
actually have done that too. So it's like I have a
Okay.
sweet spot of the amount of load that I can do as well. So one of the best kind of blocks that I went through was we ran like we know that ascending sort of stuff works for my squat, right? On a secondary day. And I've shown you like the data behind that. That speed stays the same no matter the load on the bar. I can take 15 kilo jump set to set, and my speed is exactly the same. Like it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So what we tried was like, and this is like getting up to this 220. So what we did was I'd hit an RPE based top single, and then like my triples or 4s after would still be at the same load that I would hit my 7s for on the top set on the Monday. On the Friday, I'd then just replicate that. So I'd take, say if I took 215 for 7 on a Monday, that was my back down stuff on the Friday.
Yep. So you'd cap the percentage there.
Yeah. And I'd only do 3 or 4 reps. So we already knew, like based on Monday, the fact that 215 for 7 moved to RPE 6, even if I hit a top single after, I was dropping nearly 60 kilos to come back down, and it was moving how we expected it to move. And that was some of the most, I guess, high performing blocks that I've ever had.
Interesting.
Whereas you give me RPE based back down stuff after my top single, and it's the opposite. I'll go for 240 for 3. Like I said earlier, like that's what I'll try and do because it makes more sense.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. So like, yeah, you've found in terms of like intensity, you found that sweet spot where you stay around, right? And
Yeah.
what happens then if say like your tens, your nines, your eights, your sevens don't progress at a rate that sets your like sevens up again? Because that might be a common like a common issue or like obstacle that you might face, right? Like if you stray away from what has proven to work and it doesn't work, what would you do then?
So what we've done for me in the past is, we've gone away, we've gone 10, 9s, 8s and come back down to 7s, over like 4 or 5 blocks. But we've also changed the way that we'll prescribe it. So we know that ascending 7s is that's the money. That's the last 2 blocks leading into competition. That's what I've got to be doing. So it's like we'll change the prescription. We'll do like a top set of 7 with percentage-based backdowns, which for me is actually harder.
Yeah.
Like for a lot of people, it's not, but for someone that responds well to ascending work, gets higher arousal levels leading into more sets, and performs better and can get it over and done with a bit quicker, ascending stuff's better. But for me, I'll jump, right. I'll go 175, 180 last warm up, and then I'll go 220 for 7, and it absolutely destroys me because it's a huge jump. And then I'll have to, and then we take 10% off that, and then I go 200 for 2x7 or something like that after. So that's one way for me to progress it. Whereas like if I'm doing the ascending stuff, I start easier and finish in the same spot. And I kind of warm up more because I'll go 175 and then I'll go 200, which would say that'd be my 2 backdowns where I'll go like 200, 210, 220 for 7.
Yeah.
So I've progressed that in a way that I've almost made it harder on myself by taking that big jump and then coming back down. And then we do the ascending. I actually get more in, and it's better work, more quality work, and I feel better after. Whereas if taking that big jump, it's hard to also tell how I'm feeling on that day before I do it. But it's also almost like I should be good for it because of based on last week, etc.
Yeah. Is that something you said you do? Like you go percentage into backdowns?
Yeah, so we change it.
Okay.
We change it up, and then
Got you.
so we just change the prescription. If we change that, if we want to run 7s, we'll change the prescription because we know that ascending is where I've got to be like 2 blocks out, but I can't do that all the time. So it's like we just change the prescription if we're still at 7s.
Yeah,
and then
to keep it not stale.
Yeah, and it's like the novelty of the ascending stuff and how good it really works.
Yeah,
we need to be able to just use that key, I suppose, when it's needed, rather than just like run it into the ground.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean that very much covers like how you'd have to plan, especially like when you do work with someone for a very long time, you can't just keep running the same thing. And like there is long-term planning involved, and some use of periodization as a tool. But it does come after a period of time. Like once you've dialed down like the simple one block that works, then you can build like complexity outside of it.
Yeah, and it's also like a lot of it comes down to communication. I know we talk about this a lot, but it's like athlete being able to communicate to the coach what they feel like has been successful, and the coach being able to acknowledge it. But then, like at the same time, if let's use like Edward's son, for example, Squid. Like we'll go through. I know for him to be able to have a successful block for like 2 or 3 blocks before that, I really need to keep the chains on him. So I really need to be like prescribed top sets, push back downs, like up, like top sets at like his singles are like 70 to 80%. They might get a bit higher, and then it's like, but we keep that in just for skill acquisition and practice. But his backdowns is like this is where you get the freedom to be able to push them RPE based, and then it's like, and then I'll flip it and let him go, and that's when he would then the last block he did pulled a PR in training, which he's someone that performs better on the platform. So we know like based on him pulling 310 in training, like he would have been good for 315 plus on the platform, and squatted a PR too. But that that wasn't the accumulation of that one block. That was the accumulation of 4 blocks leading up to that one block.
Yeah.
And
So
just
like,
me, working with him for so long enough to acknowledge that that's what needs to be done.
yeah, got you. So like you switch between two modes where your step one is like figuring out what works, and then step two is like how to make sure it keeps working.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like step one is, we figure out that's the initial process of working with someone, right? So we figure out what works. And then step two is like, how can we get far enough away from this that will keep working without going too far enough away from it that when we go back to it, it's too different to what we're doing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Well, I think that about covers like what we wanted to talk about in terms of like training momentum and communication and everything involved with trying to plan out something that works. Was there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I think that's all. It's good chat.
Sweet. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.